Are you sufficiently rocked, Phil?
I am ready to rock.
Cool. I just rocked myself straight into this podcast, and I finished work and I've got a beer in my hand, or actually half of one because, I already drank the other half. And the first thing is hello.
Hi.
Obviously, we've already been talking before we click record, actually, so we can sort of fake a hello as if we hadn't managed to do that.
Oh, hi, Stu.
How are you doing, Phil?
Oh, I'm very well. How's yourself today?
All good, really. So remember, on the previous podcast, you were talking about this Slackware -version file in the directory, and you had this idea that you thought it would be helpful if the architecture was present within that file.
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem like a good idea. However, the thing is that when you change files like that, which have been around forever, it can have a tendency to break scripts that expect a certain format or something.
Right.
Yeah, essentially they expect a certain format of it. So yeah, that would be one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to change that kind of file this late in the day. I would consider that what's called a breaking change because of the tools that depend on the structure. They expect a certain format.
Okay, then I have a question. It used to be that Slackware release and Slackware development, currently it's 14.2 and current, both them used to read the same, and then the plus was added to current to identify it differently to 14.2. So when that changed, was that a difficult transition after 14.2 changed to 14.2 plus?
The question you're asking is, did it break anything?
Yeah.
I don't know, probably not.
I'm thinking if that's the case, then putting ARM or i386 or 64 in there. I mean, I actually think it should read like Slackware 32-bit should just be Slackware. Right. Because the x86 is the progenitor platform, if you like, the first platform. And then if it's 64-bit, it should be Slackware 64. You know, like Slackware 64 14.2 plus. But if it's Slackware ARM, it should be Slackware ARM 14.2. Right.
But you can already determine that from using other methods. The difference is, to me, is that it would depend on the positions of the data within the line of text. So, for example, if you were parsing it and you added a column in the text file, so you'd have Slackware space ARM space version number, or maybe you concatenated the Linux distribution name and the architecture so that it said Slackware ARM Slackware 64. But what is Slackware 64 anyway? Well, it's x86 64. So you see what I mean? That you'd have to figure out what the structure of the file would be, so that the applications that read it, that there has to be a common standard. Otherwise, they're going to get confused and something's going to break. The version number, you could just look at that in a script, and it depends what you do with the version number. As long as your script is able to detect that a plus means that it's not the stable release, it's a development tree, that's fine. But you see, yeah, it's really, to me, it's really about the structure of it. If you change the structure, you basically mess up loads of different things, things that you'd never expect. Even though it would be nice to see it in there, the potential ramifications of that change outweigh the benefits. I would think.
Plus, you know, there are standards that Slackware adheres to, and I think one of my problems is I see other operating systems and influences, and I think, oh yeah, that'd be good in Slackware, but Slackware doesn't compete with anything or anyone or any other distribution. It is its own entity, and it sticks to the standards that I've just mentioned. If that's the right thing to do, then that's the way it's going to be, you know.
Yeah, this brings up one of the things when you're supplying software to masses, is that you have to be cognizant of the fact that there are many different integrations and many different applications that the users are using, and they expect certain behaviors or certain structures or what have you. They expect consistency, we could put it like that. And so when you start making changes to things, particularly if they are structural, is that you will break something. It's the forwards and backwards compatibility type of thing. So even though an end user can go and change a file to make it be whatever they like, that's downstream to the vendor. So you don't have to manage any of that kind of stuff. But when you're upstream, you have to be aware of that, because the downstream do expect that the upstream has consistency. And I think that kind of thing also shows that when people talk about changing compile options or just changing something, when you're in that position of being the vendor, you don't just change things.
Yeah.
You have to think through, with your architecture hat on, what's going to happen down the road if I make this change? What could be some of the ramifications, particularly the negative ones? And then you have to think about the messaging and things like that. So that's in some respects why things move slowly, or certain parts of the processes move slowly anyway. It is quite a big difference, really. And I guess unless you actually do that, you wouldn't really think about that. The fact that you do have to think about those things, you have to maintain stability.
I was thinking something just off the wall idea of constructing a MOTD as the system boots. So you grab the SOC and the RAM and the GPU and you list it all in the MOTD. And I'm thinking, how easy would it be just to grep Slackware version and stick that in the MOTD?
The MOTD is dynamically constructed, unless it's changed. It used to be, or maybe it still is, in one of the etc.rc.d files. It takes the output of uname, I think, and it populates the etc. MOTD with it. Yeah, so it is dynamically constructed. You could do that. Personally, I find it quite irritating. So it's one of the things that on my Slackware boxes I comment. In fact, it gets scripted out. So I run scripts to prepare my machines, and that thing is commented out automatically because I like my MOTDs to remain fixed. Ordinarily, the message of the day is for the sysadmin to put some information for the users when they log in. And you normally want that to remain under your control. You want it to persist across reboots.
I personalize all my machines, you see, because I don't use tmux or anything like that. I actually open a terminal window for every machine I'm working on. I know it's old-fashioned and inefficient, but that's the way I work.
What's that got to do with the MOTD?
So because I'm using so many terminal windows, if I'm logging into one and it comes up and it says blah, 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 I'm thinking, right, now I'm on the right machine. I mean, I know all the IP addresses, but I just like the MOTD. I just like confirmation.
But you can do that anyway. You can set the actual terminal window name.
Yeah, I have it's just a bash script which deploys files, and when I do a reinstall, because all my Raspberry Pis except one are build machines, so I need them to be pretty much the same all the time. So when I reinstall Slackware on one, I just run this script and it chucks all the files where it's supposed to. And specific things like RC local and ntp.conf, things like that, just specific to each machine. I find it easier than doing it manual every time, because I do actually quite often reinstall Slackware.
Well, my build systems have the same. So the MOTD is constructed of the host name, what its position is in the build farm, and then how much RAM it's got and what the model is.
Yeah,
so
pretty much same as mine.
I used to remember what they all were, but then they're just little details that aren't the most important thing. So I just kind of forget them. And then, so I have a script that populates all of that stuff now.
Yeah, so do I.
When the machines are set up. But do you know what I'm talking about setting the terminal window? So the terminal title bar window.
Yeah, it's, what option is it? There's an option you can specify. Is it N, window name? I'm not sure.
It might be, but the way that I do it is using echo-NE, then with some special characters, and then that sets the terminal window. I'll paste it in for you, actually. You can into the chat and you can see.
Have a play around with it. Yeah, good.
I don't know if that works on the Skype chat. Maybe it's screwed up some of the characters. I don't know. But it should be.
I'll give it a
try
test.
It out. Yeah, that comes from the installer. That's in the Qgo script in the roots, in the installer's root home directory. So this week I've been following the Slackware updates, and I'm almost at the point where I'm ready to drop SeaMonkey and perhaps even Thunderbird, because building the most recent versions of Firefox, Thunderbird and SeaMonkey have just started to take a lot of time. Even now, minor releases just aren't building anymore. And so I'm starting to look at it and think, Yeah, I think I might drop at least SeaMonkey, because SeaMonkey and Thunderbird aren't working. I'm thinking, okay, I can look at Thunderbird. It's an email app, but SeaMonkey. I mean, I still use it on the x86 64 machine for a couple of things, but I'm thinking there's already Firefox. I want to make sure that always builds. I've spent quite a bit of time on that. You've got to have a web browser, but SeaMonkey, I'm not really sure where that fits anymore because it's a browser and it's some other things. But Thunderbird and Firefox, I can understand keeping those two. Certainly can always understand keeping Firefox, but I think I might drop SeaMonkey. I just don't see the return on investment. I don't see the point in it. I might give it another little go. If anybody wants to give that a go, they can look at the x86 64 build script, figure out how to get that compiling from there and send me a diff, and then I'll merge it into the Slackware ARM build system. But if not, I'm probably going to drop SeaMonkey, and then I can at least try and figure out how to get Thunderbird building again. It's nice to have these things in there and to get everything built, but it's kind of got to the point where I'm thinking I don't really see the value of spending time on some of those types of things. I'd rather spend it elsewhere.
I built a cross compiler earlier this week, the GCC 9.3. It's not normally a difficult process to build the cross compiler, but I had a hell of a lot of problems with this one. Because what I'd done in the 9.2 script, obviously I'd updated it from 9.1 and I'd added bits, which I then, after 2 days of struggling, found out that these bits I'd added needed taken away again. I was going back to the original 9.1 script, and all I did was update the GCC and the glib and the bin utils, and it compiled straight off the bat without a problem. And I'd spent 2 days prior to this struggling to find out why it wouldn't build. Annoying at the time, but you know when you find out what the problem is and you think, oh my God, it was such a simple solution.
It's often like that, yeah.
It built beautifully and it compiles beautifully.
But you should be using the same version of all of the tools that's in the distribution of Slackware that you're building for.
I know this isn't the best method, but the rule of thumb is I look at all the release dates of the versions and I think, right, glibc was released 2 weeks before GCC, so those two versions must be together. So, I compare release dates. Okay. I should be using exactly what is in Slackware. That is great advice. I'm going to take you up on that.
I get your logic, kind of, but it doesn't really work like that. Those are two different projects.
Yeah, I mean, my method could be completely wrong, whereas yours, it will never be wrong. So I see sense in that. I'm going to look in Slackware and just take the versions from there and build those same versions.
If there is a problem with building those, it would be most likely some local problem. But you shouldn't have any. I mean, the cross-compiler toolchain script that I put out is the one that I maintain for my own build system. So it's always as up to date as it needs to be to build. Well, actually, I should say it's as up to date as it needs to be to build the toolchain on the systems that I have, which is a mixture of 14.2 and some of the later updates from current. You need to use the same toolchain for consistency.
Yeah. Half the problem is I'm building my own. I've been doing it a few years now, but still feeling my way through the patches and the problems and the errors that come up that even Google hasn't heard of, that kind of thing. It's not always easy. I think I had a conversation with you about this previously where this downloads your mini root and it downloads the Slackit and it downloads the packages and it incorporates the cross compiler that I built and it mashes everything together and builds your packages from your build script in 64-bit. I mean, it is probably the worst hack job I've ever done in my life, but that's how I got to easily build, without doing them. Could do it individually, but just imagine, 1,620 packages or something in Slackware? Just imagine how long it would take to do all those individually.
I'm not sure what the mini root has to do with it. The build system has already got most of the build scripts have already got the facility to build on 64-bit just in case, because I was doing lots of updates a while ago. So I thought I may as well just add in 64-bit support in case I ever happen to fancy doing it.
That's because I was trying to build a SARPy 64-bit package build machine. And the mini root I used for the boot disk. That was the plan. I mean, Stuart, it gets complicated because I'm on a job, I'm doing a project, and I'm thinking, this will be good to include. So I'll do a little bit of code and then forget about it and then carry on doing what I'm doing. And then when I actually get to that code, I've forgotten why I put this code there. And so I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this sounds good, but why is it here?
You might need to put a bit of explanation around it, perhaps, next time.
You know what it's like. So that a lot of my script, although I comment everything, it doesn't always make sense because I'm on a particular path, thinking on a particular thing, and then when you approach it again and you're not on that same path, it's sometimes hard to get back to where you were.
I know what you mean. Yeah, when I do that, I end up writing, I don't know, about 20 lines of explanation of what my thinking is. So the more explanation there is, the more easily it reminds me of the context at that time. And so the ideas more readily return. That's what I find. Even though it's more effort up front to document it that way, it does help with the subsequent recall of that, I find anyway. But yeah, that's what you kind of have to do. You're trying to fit things in between other main projects and things.
Yeah. It was a plan because I wanted to see if I could build packages from your source tree as is. I wanted to build a script where I could just run it. I could download all your stuff. I could just run a script and it would build the packages 64-bit because I'm lazy like that. I want it all easy. So it was just a bit of a test, really, a bit of a prototype, which I intend to go back to because I've just got hold of a StarTech USB 3 to SATA 3 adapter. You might or might not be interested, but I think it was the 2nd of September or the 3rd of September. Raspberry Pi developers released some boot firmware which allowed you to boot the Raspberry Pi from a storage device, like a USB storage device or a hard drive. So I've got myself this cable because I've got a nice 480 gigabyte Kingston SSD, which will plug straight into it. Now, I have found if I install Slackware ARM current on the SSD, this is crazy, I know, but it doesn't compile as quick as if I boot from micro SD card and just have the swap and root partition on the SSD. If I have the boot partition on the SSD as well, it slows it down a little bit. I don't know why. I've done some testing with it and it seems strange, but this is the Raspberry Pi we're talking about, which has its own little idiosyncrasies and quirks. The only interest I have in the cross compiler is to build Slackware ARM packages 64-bit. I know I do the SARPy64 stuff, which is just meant for people to pick up and use if it's useful. But for me, the cross compiler, it's all behind the scenes work.
Are you using DistCC?
No.
But the SlackKit package tool that you're talking about is actually to be run natively.
Yeah.
All of those build scripts are to run natively. So how are you using a cross compiler for it then?
A cross compiler from ARMv7 to ARMv8.
Oh, okay, right.
Sorry, I'm not cross compiling architect. Well, I am, but Stuart, we've had this conversation a million times, and we always get confused.
So you're running it on ARM, but the output.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so it's a cross compiler.
It's an ARMv8 system. The hardware is ARMv8, but we're running ARMv7 on it. I want to compile Slackware packages for ARMv8 on an ARMv7 system.
Okay.
Now, you've said in the past, you don't think it would be possible. You would need a 64-bit system on which to compile it first. I'm going to see how far I can get with that. Slackware, you know yourself, Slackware is very facilitating in certain ways when it comes to uncharted territory.
Yeah, you've got the freedom to do what you like with that. Yeah, it is a lot easier to just hack on it and get it to work through a hacking approach. I'd say it's a lot easier than the distribution. Yes. But not everything is going to work there because there are packages that expect to run the binaries that they just produced, which won't work.
Such as, for example?
Well, ncurses. There are many others as well.
Not a problem. As long as it's not like glib or something really important to the system. If I can get a 64-bit system to a point where I can build on it, as a 64-bit system, then there's no problem after that. I'm going to be bugging you for information on.
I'm curious how. Yeah, let me know how you get on.
Well,
I like the optimism.
I don't know what I'm doing, right? You do, I don't. So I'm going to be bugging you. When I get to a point where I really don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to be bugging you for information. And to me, it doesn't seem difficult. I'm sure it is, but it doesn't. It's just going to take time and effort and a bit of knowledge. But I will certainly keep you updated on how it goes.
Yeah, I'm curious how that goes. I mean, I did something similar to Bootstrap from 14.2, the legacy software floating point architecture, to the current one. I did do something similar. I built some of the packages on what's now 14.2.
Yeah.
But I did some other tricks as well, pulled those out of my box of tricks to get things working, because there are certain rivers that you just really can't cross, or you could, but it would require more effort than it is to find a detour.
Right.
I'll let you find out the lay of the land for yourself.
Oh, you're good at that. You're good
fun.
at that. You've done your time, haven't you?
Yeah. I know how I would do it.
I remember years ago when I was first building this, and I bugged you for about 2 weeks, every day asking the same question: what are the C flags for building 64-bit? And you just wouldn't answer me. And at the end of sort of 10 days or so, or 12 days, you actually said, "Have you worked it out yet?" And I said, "No, I'm tearing my hair out here." And I'd spent literally hours on this, and you just simply said, "There are no C flags. It's the same C flags as 32-bit." And I'm like,
what I said was you could just use -02 for
that's it.
second optimization level, because the hardware is so new that if you're targeting that when you build your tool chain, you set that as the architecture, and that 64-bit ARM or aarch64, that is the base architecture, so you can't tune it for anything else. Unlike ARM v7, where there's lots of different tuning options for the different hardware, I imagine that the 64-bit version of ARM will end up the same. They'll end up with tuning options and things, but at least the time that you're talking about, which I think actually was a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think more than
maybe more, maybe 3.
Yeah. Late 2016 when I started this, and it was probably mid 2017 before I got the thing to build properly. So yeah, it's going back a bit.
Yeah, well, if I win the lottery or end up with some huge financial injection, then I'll just do a 64-bit. Just give me a couple of months.
That'd be great. That'd be great. The way I see it, and I know I'm comparing again, but there's a lot of other ARM operating systems being released with 64-bit versions now. And Slackware ARM 32-bit on a Raspberry Pi 4, it's not right. There's potential power and resources that can't be reached. I want Slackware ARM 64-bit so I can see what it's capable of. Raspberry Pi 4 is a very powerful machine, and it's the speed at which I can compile on it compared to the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus. It does it in about a quarter of the time.
Right.
It's unreal. I know a quarter or less is the usual sort of time frame you can work on. They're only going to get bigger, better, faster, more powerful. So I think now the time is right. What you would say Slackware ARM proper 64-bit needs to be done.
Well, yeah. Let me know how it goes.
Have you scraped enough pennies together to buy a Raspberry Pi? Because I had a good idea. I had an idea that you've heard of Kickstarter, haven't you?
I am familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah. We could start off a Kickstarter to try and get you funded for a Raspberry Pi. I'm sure there's benevolent Slackware supporters and users out there that would throw a quid in the jar to get Moses a Raspberry Pi 4 or something like that.
Is this revenge for mentioning Rick Astley in a previous podcast?
I can't believe you mentioned Rick. It's every time, isn't it? It's like the ace card up your sleeve. Well, I'm not one to tell tales, but you own an orange VW Passat, Satsuma orange, and you drive it around with the windows down, blasting out Shakin' Stevens music. Now then, that's not the end of this story. Normally, people have like a sun banner with like Paul and Tracy written on it. You have one that says Shakin' Stevens, and instead of furry dice hanging from the rear view mirror, you've got like a Action Man sized pair of beetle crushers just to honour your deity.
I don't know why you're so personally attached to the Raspberry Pi. You know, it kind of fuels this thing inside of you. You know, there's not going to be a Raspberry Pi anywhere near my house, and I hope that my neighbours don't own a Raspberry Pi. In fact, if they do, I'm going to get a tape measure and measure the distance from where that CPU is from to my house. I don't want any Raspberry Pis coming anywhere near, for all the reasons that I've said before.
Yeah.
If they made a nice piece of hardware that integrated nicely with the ecosystem, I would have looked at them years ago. And I just don't want a Raspberry Pi. So please don't anybody create a Kickstarter, because I'd like the money, but I'm not going to buy a Raspberry Pi with it. So,
maybe somebody can just donate one. You know,
I've got no use for one. I'm not going to make a 64-bit port because my 32-bit works perfectly fine. And I can't use a 60. I mean, I could use a 64-bit machine to run the 32-bit OS on, but I'm quite happy. I'd rather run the OS that I build, because then I'm using it and I know whether it works. I can fix anything that comes up. But a 64-bit machine I couldn't use as a build machine, because software would automatically detect and blah, and it would break the 32-bit distribution.
Yeah.
It wouldn't actually get used. But if they did make some nice hardware, that would be, I guess it would be interesting. But again, I still couldn't really make that much use of it. But nice try.
It's not your cup of tea, I know, but it is very, very useful. Compared to my Orange Pi, this just leaves it in a cloud of dust, does the Raspberry Pi 4.
Sure.
It is so quick, and when it breaks, I'm not like recompiling U-boot or doing anything like that. I just rewrite the boot firmware on a USB stick, which is FAT32, and then just copy it across, and it's just fixed in 30 seconds or a minute. You know, it's so easy. It's easy to forget sometimes that this is Slackware Linux because of the boot firmware. I mean, it works not exactly the same way as an x86 machine, but it works more like an x86 machine than say a U-boot bootloader would. What did they call them files, Stuart?
What, the DTB files?
No, the boot files on an MS Windows system. You know, you've got config text file on your boot partition on a Raspberry Pi, where you've got your config sys on Windows, and it's just a naming similarity, but similar in the way that they work.
Yeah, I get it. I do think that a 64-bit version of Slackware on a 64-bit hardware makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it does.
It certainly would on the 8 gig version. That's just like all your birthdays and Christmases at once, isn't it, on an ARM device?
Exactly.
I don't know any other device that has 8 gig. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few soon.
I imagine there are some server hardware where you've got, say, Facebook and some of the other big players who are looking to reduce the physical footprint and the power consumption and that kind of thing. So there was some pretty good architecture coming out to address that need. But,
I'm ramping things up on the SARPy side of things. I've made several changes to the build system. Now building a kernel headers package. I'm going to be shipping that out soon. And
you decided to do that? You asked about that last time.
Your advice was, if I remember correctly, you don't necessarily need it. In fact, no, you don't need it because the headers are included in the source tree. But it's handy to have around in case you do need it. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. I can just build it and have it there if I ever need to use it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. From what I remember back in the olden days, and actually, it really was quite a while ago now, was that the kernel headers package needed to be the version of the kernel headers that glibc was compiled against. So when you upgraded the kernel, you didn't have to upgrade the kernel headers package unless you were also rebuilding glibc or building a new version of glibc against the latest kernel headers package that you had. But that seemed to change when you had packages that were building kernel modules and things like that, and then they wanted the kernel headers of the latest version of the kernel. I don't know if at that point those two things became linked, or I've just got it wrong. I'm not sure. I just know how to make it work. When I upgrade to a major kernel release, I always upgrade glibc anyway and make it build against the latest kernel header packages for that release. But if it's a minor version of the kernel upgrade, then we ship a new version of the kernel header packages anyway, because they shouldn't have changed sufficiently enough that they break glibc. That, because it's only a minor release, that seems to be fine. That's the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, let's call it a day on this episode, and then we'll pick it up again next time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stu. Nice talking to you.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too, mate. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye for now.